Let's talk about some further details of 14th century knightly armour. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria, and hopefully you've seen yesterday's video release on the channel. Big video, I know, nearly an hour long, so hopefully you've had a chance to watch that by now, and if you haven't, I do suggest you watch it before watching this video, but you can watch this video as a standalone. So we're going to look here at some specific points that came up in that video that I did with Dr Tobias Capwell, aka Toby Capwell, that came up to do with the Reginald Cobham armour in Lingfield in Surrey, but also this is a more general, I guess, talking about certain aspects of 14th century knightly armour around the year, in this case, 1360. And I'm even going to be answering a few of your specific questions which were posted underneath that video in the comments and also on the Schola Gladiatoria Facebook page. So we're going to jump straight in here with one of the points made by Demian X6X6 X6X and he says, I've never seen an effigy with the paint still on. It's amazing, even if the paint isn't the original. So there's a point I think to make really clear about this. Most effigies were painted to some degree. So when you see those stone monuments that are, you know, plain alabaster or any other type of stone on tombs, they were usually painted to some degree. Now it doesn't mean that they were 100% painted. So sometimes we think that the stone, for example, would have been left on the skin, like the face and the hands, but key elements would have been painted in some cases, and as we see in Reginald Cobham's case, the entire thing was painted. Now in that case it has been repainted by a Victorian antiquarian, but we think that he repainted the colours and the patterns and everything else that was already there. So essentially he restored it. And partially that's why it's been protected in the way that it has been. So we think probably the colours and even the studs on the cuisses, and we'll talk about those in a second, are authentic. And so yes, indeed, most effigies would have been painted, and indeed churches. So in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, basically post-Protestantism, a lot of churches were made far more austere and plain. A lot of medieval churches would have been a lot more colourful than we see now. And in fact, sometimes when churches are being restored or having works done on them, maybe you've got a plain white wall and the whitewash is taken off. And we find great big painted scenes, biblical scenes, sometimes also heraldic, on walls. So you can sometimes find churches where we've got entire painted walls. So if we look at both the Catholic Church but also the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox churches, which traditionally are a lot more colourful than Western European or Northern European Protestant churches, then this is closer to what the medieval churches would have been like in their entirety, not just the effigies, but the walls, the arches, all sorts of stuff. So another good comment here from Be Afraid of Insect Attack says, I've always wondered how they reduced the weight of mail, aka chainmail. I imagine hauberks and mail in general probably tired out the wearer's shoulders. It's good to know about technological ceilings arms and armour hit and had to break through during this time. So something specifically on that, yes, that's absolutely the case, that mail, because it hangs essentially off your shoulders, if you just wear a mail shirt by itself, it is very tiring on the shoulders. And I have to say, this is actually true of any armour that isn't cinched in at the waist. So whether it's brigandines or whether it's things like the corazina or this potential breastplate and cuirass that we see in late 14th century armour, the whole point of that waist is to spread the weight between the waist and the shoulders, as Toby Capwell explained in the video, a bit like with a rucksack having the belt around. So this is actually true of any armour. So I don't want you to think this only applies to mail or only applies to cuirasses. It applies to brigandines as well. And for example, my own brigandine, I don't disclose this very often, but isn't very well fitted to me. It's not as tight around my waist as it should be. Now that's not because I lost loads of weight. It's basically because in my ignorance and innocence, I measured around an overly thick gambeson, which I don't wear it over. So the problem is that and this is a pro tip for anyone who's measuring up for armour. You've got to get the tightest, most well-fitted and tailored arming garment or double it underneath your armour as you can do when you make those measurements, because if you make the waist too big, it's very difficult to make it tighter again, even with a brigandine, because of the plates, because you've got a certain number of plates around the waist. And so my brigandine could do to be probably 2 inches smaller around the waist, and that would bring it in more at the waist. When I wear my brigandine for any amount of time, it is very tiring on my shoulders because too much of the weight is on the shoulders instead of pulled in at the waist. Now, something that vaguely came up in the comments, but I want to comment a bit more on, is type of mail and the complexity of mail. So most European mail is a 4-in-1 link. So each one link has 4 rings attached to it. Now, if you look at Japanese mail, for example, we sometimes get 6 rings in one, but this is also known in Europe as well. So we do find this occasionally in Europe. So generally speaking, it's 4-in-1. It can be 6-in-1, but there are also different types of rings. Most modern made mail is alternating between riveted and unriveted, so solid rings, then so you have a row of riveted, then a row of solid, then a row of riveted. This makes it faster to make mail. However, most mail of the 14th and 15th centuries is actually fully riveted. Okay, every single ring is riveted. Another big difference is that the way that they are riveted very fastidiously on the original mail means that the overlapping connecting rings are generally speaking stronger than most of the modern replica rings. But when we test mail in a lot of modern tests, we often find that the failure point is the rivet. However, on original rings, at least on the good quality stuff, it can be that is actually the strongest point because it's kind of beefed up around that area. So it's quite difficult testing mail because getting really accurate, really well-made mail is not that easy in the modern world. You can do it, and I have been sent a few samples, and there are people out there like Isak Krog, for example, who are making very good mail. So there are good mail makers, but most of the mass-produced Indian mail, which I freely admit most of my mail is not as good as the period mail. In addition to this, so we've got quality of mail, we've got number of rings connecting, but we've also got different gauges of wire. Okay, so the thickness of the wire can be different and the material can be different. It can be wrought iron, it could be low carbon steel. In some cases, the sources, the texts even imply that some mail was potentially even heat treated, was even steel. So we've got different levels of material, different types of weave and mesh, different gauge of wire. And this was used differently on different parts of the body. Okay, so when we're talking about a hauberk or we're talking about an aventail coming down from the bassinet, it can be different strengths and different stiffnesses. So if, for example, we've got a collar around the neck, this can afford to be quite small rings, quite closely woven with thick gauge wire. It can be quite stiff and therefore a lot better protecting around here because you don't need the flexibility. However, somewhere like the top of the shoulders, you need a lot of movement and flexibility, so you're going to have a different type of mail there. So without going into too much, maybe we'll do a deep dive video on mail at some point with one of the mail experts out there, of which I'm not one. But just to say that mail, even just within one garment, like a hauberk, a shirt, can vary a lot. The size of the rings, the stiffness, the weave, and everything else can vary within one garment a lot, so that in some areas you have more flexibility, and in some areas we have more protection, thicker, heavier stiffness, and that changes a vast amount of things about how we assume how mail armour protects and moves. So brief tangent, Eric the Red 2023 says, great to see Toby Capwell again. He's a rare sight since he left the Wallace collection. Is this old footage getting used, or is he back? Well, he's never gone away. So I've actually done an interview with Toby, which you'll see maybe in about a week or maybe 2 weeks' time, where we talk about what he's been working on and what he does. In fact, Toby's been incredibly busy since he left the Wallace collection. So for those of you who don't know, he was curator of arms and armour at the Wallace collection for many, many years. And he left there and now works independently. He does lectures for a whole bunch of different institutions, museums. He's been over at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York doing things. He's writing various books, which we'll talk about in that video. And he does obviously TV work and that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of what's taking up his time at the moment is books. But to answer the question, this is completely new footage. It was literally shot 1 week ago, and we're going to be doing more as well. So any special requests or things you want to see me do with Toby, or for Toby to do independently in the future, then feel free to get posting below. So a really good comment actually, which is worth emphasising rather than necessarily responding to, it's Even Morris 1178 says, one amazing detail here is how very close fitting the armour appears. No extra bulk or thickness. And that is a really important point to make, because if you look at modern reenactment or bowhurt or whatever, so much modern gear is overbuilt. And that's because we've got different priorities, okay? So bowhurt, for example, barely anyone, as far as I have seen, barely anyone wears mail in the gaps. So when a bowhurt fighter lifts their arm up, you can see the gambesum underneath. Well, that wouldn't be very good if people were shooting arrows at you. So it wouldn't be very good if you were allowed to stab into gaps, you know, with sharp weapons. So bowhurt armour has evolved for bowhurt. It's not the same armour as would be used on a 14th century battlefield. And most bowhurt fighters completely know that. I'm not, you know, I'm not like having a go at them or having a dig or anything like this. It is optimized for bowhurt. And if you go to, for example, I'm having some armour made by Tabor Armoury at the moment. They make bowhurt armour, they make historical armour, and some armourers make like sport optimized versions of gauntlets, so they're more protective, but they're not like the originals. They might be, you know, a bit bulkier, a bit heavier. They might have end caps on the thumbs, for example, which aren't historical, at least not usually. So there's a difference. And when you make armour for a specific purpose, and this was true in the 15th or 16th century, where they made, or even 14th, where they made tournament specific armour, that was different to battlefield armour, and we find tournament or dual regulations and accounts which describe whether it is a tournament armour or a field armour. So yes, absolutely one of the characteristic features of 14th century armour is that it is close fitting, svelte, I like that word. It is close to the body, it's close to the arms, it is not bigger, it is not bulkier, there is not lots of padding, it is close in, and it is designed to protect against cuts, thrusts and arrows. Those are the priorities. It is not particularly designed to protect amazingly well against blunt force trauma, which is why maces were probably more effective in period in the 14th or 15th century than they are in, let's say, modern bowhurt, because of course modern bowhurt is completely optimized for blunt forced impact, but completely not optimized for piercing in gaps or arrows. So the next point, I'm not going to refer to a specific post, although Daniel Walker Q1T gets a call out because he refers to leg armour. But a few people questioned the brigandine-like or coated plates-like upper cuisse or thigh defence. And I've got something to add to what I said in the original video. And that is, sometimes in armour development, what we see is based on what went before. So you might think, well, why didn't they just immediately make leg armour like arm armour? Why was the arm armour seemingly more advanced than the leg armour? Well, Toby touched on a very important point there. Sometimes it was literally different people. If you think about modern companies, let's say Apple make leg armour, but I don't know, Microsoft make arm armour. They're different companies making different things. So, you know, or like Android versus iOS. So, you know, Apple have decided to do something one way, Android have decided to do something another way, and they just work in different ways. And you learn both of those things. You buy your leg armour from Apple, you buy your arm armour Android or Microsoft or whatever, and they're just different. So that's part of it. But there's another thing, and that is that for the large part, plate defences, or rather enhanced defences, appear on the legs before they appear on the arms. Now, if we go back all the way back to the Morgan Bible, we actually see leg defences. We see shinbalds, which Toby made reference to, so greaves, already in about 1240. So we're 100 years, 120 years earlier at this point than this effigy. So greaves have been around for a long time. They're old technology, and people know, well, you take a greave, you stick it over the top of male leggings, essentially. Okay, so that's one thing. So greaves have their own development. But then when you look at the upper leg defences, we actually see one of the earliest upper leg defences that we see glimpses of. Again, we see some in the Morgan Bible, seem to be kind of quilted or padded. So you've already got on your mind, in the year 1240, the idea that you have a hard defence on the lower leg, but a soft defence on the upper leg, and then you fill the gap with some type of knee cop, which could be made of brass, could be made of cuibuli, leather, or whatever. Okay, and still in 1360, because people are inherently conservative. I don't mean in a political sense. I mean that they inherently tend to do things like people did when they were children. So, you know, if you grow up in your childhood and that's how your dad does it, that's how you will tend to do it in adulthood. And yes, you'll change, you'll evolve, but it will take time. So I would say that in addition to the kind of guild kind of mentality or company's mentality of different people make arms to make legs, in addition to that, we've got that leg defences in the 13th century, 100 years earlier. We'd already had this ethos of having fabric stuff on the upper legs, hard defence on the lower shin, and then something on the knee, and linking these three things together. And that's what we really still see on the Reginald Cobham effigy of 1361. We still see that mentality. And yes, it changed in the next couple of decades, but we're still stuck in that mentality, almost a 13th century mentality at this point. So Daniel Walker, in fact, made another good point about male shirts, and one of the advantages of them is you can take them on and off yourself, as people had done for hundreds of years, even thousands actually, if we go back to the Roman period. So yes, indeed, that's one advantage. But there is another point as well to say about male shirts and wearing them underneath plate. Remember that, again, conservatism, people wear male shirts, so we wear male shirts. Oh, there's a new breastplate. Well, I'll stick the breastplate over the male shirt, but I still wear a male shirt because people have always worn male shirts going back hundreds of years. That's what my great-great-grandfather fought in the Crusades with. And, you know, so there's a degree of conservatism, but there's another thing as well. And we see this going into the 15th and the 16th century. So hundreds of years after plate armour has been a thing. And that is one of the beautiful things of a male shirt, having a full male shirt underneath, instead of just having voiders, so a skirt and armpits and a collar, is that you can take your breastplate or your cuirass or your coat of plates off, and you've still got a male shirt on. And in fact, people were still using just a male shirt as a standalone defence in the 16th century, where you see the Galaglass wearing them in the 16th century. But back in the 15th century, we see absolutely tons of common soldiers, you know, pikemen and crossbowmen and people like this, and the only armour they've got on their bodies is a male shirt. And in fact, in some cases, people wore male shirts underneath civilian clothes as a protection against assassination if they were living, for example, in Florence, where you've got these kind of inter-family assassinations going on, but it happened equally in Paris as well. We've got references to male shirts being worn underneath clothes against assassination in Paris during the 100 Years' War, in the sort of feuding between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, where there were a number of assassinations, in fact. So mail is incredibly versatile. You can wear it under your plate, you can wear it as a standalone armour, you can wear it with civilian clothes underneath as a hidden armour, you can wear it in the modern world as an anti-knife defence, and some people do. So male shirts have many, many virtues, and you might think that, wow, that's a lot of weight to wear under my plate. But if you're on campaign and some of the time you want to take your plate off, you're still wearing full armour because you've still got a male shirt on. So they have many, many advantages. Right, so Quentin Stevens has zeroed in on those gold spots on the upper legs. So I'm going to explain to you why Toby and I are both pretty convinced that they do represent rivets on a coat of plates or brigandine type construction. So first of all, is this plate, is it just, if we ignore the colours and we painted it all black, is this upper leg just a plate defence? Well, the answer is no, because there's no evidence of hinges or straps or any way of opening at the side. So therefore, there's no way of getting the leg into it. So then it must be flexible, and the closure point, the straps, presumably, sometimes can be laced or pointed, but probably straps must be at the back of the leg, because they're not visible at the inside of the leg, the outside of the leg, or clearly anywhere at the front, and there's no hinges. So it must be flexible. So it must be either leather or fabric. That's the first thing. Now, if you've got either leather or fabric, it would be basically unheard of to only have leather or fabric on the upper legs when we can see that we've got plate on the knees and the lower legs. So there must be some sort of plate thing in there. So the second point is that we know that when they repainted it based on what was there before. Now, it would be a pretty weird thing for someone to just go and paint a load of gold spots on there if there hadn't been something indicating that there had been spots on it before. Okay, so that's the second thing. The third and final thing is we have other art to look at. Not only do we have other brasses and effigies which exhibit this same feature in this same period, but we've even got manuscript illuminations of this, showing people like Richard III and the Black Prince with studs on their upper cuisses. So basically, when you take all of these three things together, the upper legs really reasonably, there is no other decent explanation for the fact than those are indeed a brigandine or coat of plates type construction for the upper legs. And my interpretation would be that they wrap around and probably have 2 or 3 straps at the back of the leg and probably fully encased upper legs. So this is a specific question from Amelf P. I won't read it out, but basically asking, what would the quillons on the sword have looked like? We don't know. However, we can look at other period effigies and brasses to get a rough idea. They're almost certainly straight with little turned down ends or perhaps little knobs on the end. And I would say, if I had to hedge money on it, if I had to bet money on it, I would say look at the dagger, and they're probably exactly like the dagger, because it's clear that this sword and dagger were made as, or intended to be, a set. So I would look at the dagger quillons there, and I would imagine that the sword quillons would be like a scaled up version of those. Now 3K asks a really interesting question, and that's, how did they get their hands through a narrowly tapered sleeve? Well, so we know that narrow sleeves existed, and usually there would be, my understanding anyway, is that there would be a split, and this would have a thong, essentially. So a bit like when you button up your sleeve on a dress shirt. However, my personal opinion, and I'm not saying this is Toby's opinion, because I think he's hedging his bets more, but my personal opinion is that in this case, we probably don't have a full length sleeve. Probably the sleeve ends about there. So it's like an overlong t-shirt, long enough to cover the gap on the inside of the bend of the elbow, and long enough to stay underneath the lower cannon, as we call it, or the kind of forearm defense, and not fall out or get pulled out. However, there's no need for that male sleeve to go all the way down, and I think in 1361 it probably doesn't. Right, so Bartolomeo the Satyr says, is that effigy life-sized, and if so, Sir Cobham was a wee little fellow. Actually not that. So I mean, if it is life-size, he was maybe like 5'6" or something like that. Bear in mind that I'm 6'1", so by historical standards, I'm pretty tall. Not to say that there weren't people taller than me in history. I think Henry VIII was about 6'2", but he was very unusual. The historical average height of English men at this time, according to burials and statistics that the Museum of London have compiled, if I remember correctly, in the 14th century, it's about 5'6". And today the modern average is, I think, 5'10". So yes, we are taller on average. Maybe it was 5'7", 5'6", 5'7", around there, and now it's 5'10". Sorry, I only know imperial here. But so yes, we are on average, we get more childhood nutrition. Obviously we've got vaccinations and everything else. So we're generally speaking fewer childhood diseases, much lower infant mortality, thankfully. So yes, we are on average slightly bigger than they were then. As for the basic answer to the question, yes, it is essentially life-size. The effigies, not the brasses, but the effigies in the church here are basically life-size. Right, so the final question I'm going to address here, but it was asked by a few people, but one example here is Mohammed FB9VT. You didn't talk about the black colour of the armour. I think it's black from the hammer. So in a nutshell, we don't know for certain that the colours are original, but Toby thinks they probably are, and I'd be inclined to agree with him because we've got a number of corroborating other sources to back that up. So the black, is it black from the hammer? Probably yes. Black from the hammer is due to oxidization because when you heat steel up, it oxidizes at an accelerated rate. Incidentally, when you gun blue something chemically, that is also oxidization, but done through a different means. So armour could be blacked basically in three potential ways. One is from heat, either from the forging or potentially from heat treatment, quenching, which for the same reason. Or it could be because it's painted. Or thirdly, potentially it could be chemically done. Now, I know some people might go, what? In the 14th century? It's theoretically possible. You can chemically blue, brown, you can chemically colour things if you make the right concoction. So absolutely, they could have chemically blued or blacked things in the 14th century. Do I think that's how they did it? Probably not. Usually it was done with heat. Usually it was either done through quenching and tempering, or it was done through just, it was left forged blackened. It could also be painted, and we have surviving examples of painted armour as well. So, do I think these are the original colours? I think there's a good chance, yes. And as discussed in the main video, I think the gold elements of the knees and the shoulders, there is other corroborating evidence for those being made of latten. Let's call it brass, could be bronze, but probably more likely to be brass most of the time. The surviving, Toby talks about knuckle elements and parts of gauntlets. They are more similar to brass than to bronze, as I understand it, although they're all alloys, they're all copper alloys, so copper alloy. So I think the goldy colour bits are probably copper alloy, but they could be gilded iron, they could be gilded copper alloy. The black bits are probably rough from the hammer and left blackened, but they could be painted. They could theoretically be chemically darkened as well. So yes, I think the colours are probably original, and I think we should get out of the mindset of imagining that all armour was brightly polished and silver and shiny. A lot of it was, not to say that it wasn't, but a lot of it was also other things, painted, blackened, whatever. Anyway, thanks a lot. I hope this has added something to that first video. Do watch that video if you haven't done already, because there's just a vast amount. I mean, you know, not to blow my own trumpet, but I think we squeezed a small book's worth of information into that hour-long video. And obviously, it's great to have Toby back on the channel. And there are more videos coming as well really soon, because we spent a day filming together. So there's more videos coming, and I'm sure we're going to do more in the future. If you've got special requests, any particular brasses or effigies, or even just topics that you'd like Toby and I together to discuss or look at, because we can obviously physically get together, but we can also get together on Zoom or things like that as well. So get posting in the comments down below. Or indeed other questions. Were there other questions that you wanted answered? Maybe I can look at those in a future video. So I'll see you down in the comment section down below. Thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton, and I will of course be again next time. Cheers folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks.